the most basic thing is that whenever you raise the price of anything above the level that it would reach by supply and demand, you cause more people to supply that product because the price is above what they would ordinarily get in the marketplace. But at the same time, you cause those who are demanding that particular product or service to buy less. And so labor is no different in that respect. When you raise the wage rate above what it would be under supply and demand, and otherwise there'd be no point in having minimum wage law, you'll cause more people to offer their labor, and you'll cause employers to hire fewer laborers because the labor is more expensive. I'm told that in Europe, where the minimum wages are much higher than they are in the United States, that it's common to not be able to find say, parking lot attendants. Or at many of the hotels, you have to carry your own baggage because you don't have these armies of people that you have in the United States because that labor has been priced out of the market. There are so many ramifications of it, it would be impossible to go into it all, but that's the fundamental problem.
Yeah, and this is something that, this issue, the minimum wage issue, is something that the average everyday citizen thinks that the government set up for them to help them, but ultimately it does hurt them, and I think it's severely misunderstood, incorrectly perceived, and it's a structure that's rarely ever challenged, whether it's by the Republican Party, whether it's by conservatives, intellectuals, anybody. There's really, it's kind of like we want to avoid this issue because people like it, but if it was me, that minimum wage, it could be costing me an opportunity to get a job.
Oh, absolutely, and it has different effects on different parts of the population. In countries around the world where there are minimum wages, typically the biggest victims are young, inexperienced workers, and for a very simple reason. Their labor is worth typically less than that of an experienced and more skilled worker, and therefore they're the ones who are priced out of a job. It just doesn't pay to hire someone like that. I think of my own life when my first job was as a delivery boy and general helper in a grocery store in Harlem. And there's no way that that grocer could have paid me what he would have paid an average adult because my labor just wasn't that valuable. In fact, at the time I thought he was a very harsh boss, but in retrospect I realized I don't know how the man found the patience to put up with me because I did so many things wrong and repeatedly. But if he'd been required to pay me what he would pay an adult, experienced worker, it would have bankrupted the man.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of things that it does, like all regulation, once it gets to a certain degree, it really forces things to get on the ground. And that's when places like New York, California, and all these heavily taxed states really go on the ground, and there's so many more cash businesses that, really avoid the system. And that's another penalty to the average everyday taxpayer because now we have to pay more and we have to subsidize more of the cost. And that's a natural consequence. That's a perfect segue into talking about working conditions, workplace regulations. It's always relevant conversation because we all go to work every day. We all deal with some kind of problem. The air conditioning's too high, too low. There might be somebody eats an apple and it goes on the floor. Somebody slips on it, and whatever happens, a lawsuit ends up being the case. But this is very important, especially right now, because the governor of Maine is making headlines again because he wants to roll back parts of the state child labor laws. Can you tell us a little bit more about this? Tell us how these kinds of laws are really, especially what the Maine governor is trying to do, how they're really impacting the youth and them trying to get into labor.
You see, like so many things, this arose as a decent thing to do at a particular time in history when you had kids 10 years old working in coal mines. You had kids even younger working in factories around machinery where a careless child could easily be maimed or killed. And so humanitarian people then started saying we should regulate child labor. Fine. But once you create any program, it has not only the original constituency that caused that program to exist, it acquires new constituencies. And so now today we have a situation where some strapping teenager, is forbidden to work in an air-conditioned office sitting at a computer. Because the humanitarian constituency is no longer worried about that kid, but now the labor unions and others find it useful to keep people like that out of the labor force, and the child labor laws are one of the ways of doing it. I happen to think that's enormously damaging in the sense that there are so few legal ways that a child can earn money when he's perfectly capable of working, and there are so many illegal ways that he can earn it. I mean, it really is it's almost criminal.
Yeah, and it hurts, too, for people like myself who started working and volunteering at age 14. I was working in the hospital and rehabilitation center because I really wanted to get in there. I wanted experience. I wanted a resume builder. I wanted all these things that help you once you get older. And one thing that you can learn, experience cannot be taught. It's a lesson that cannot be taught. You can only learn it with time passing by and life hitting you in the face. When I got my working card, that's how we did in New York, I had a green working card that said you're only able to work a certain amount of hours. I said, this is ridiculous. I want to work as much as I want because I'm only making $6, $7 an hour, so I want to be able to put more hours in. I'm not doing anything else. I don't want to, I'd rather do that than just hang out on the street corner. Recently, I was reading Daniel Hannon's recent book, which is Return to Serfdom. I learned in there, and it's something you touched on in your book, the country of France has a maximum of 35 hours that you can work in a certain week. Americans define a full-time work week as at least 40 hours, and many people will go into upwards of 50, 60 hours a week, depending on what their job is.
Uh-huh.
Doesn't this basically perpetuate poverty throughout the masses?
Oh, it does that because one of the things that a kid gets from a job, as you indicated, is experience, and there's no place else you can get it. So that when you price a kid out of the job with minimum wages, or you restrict his working with child labor laws, you not only deprive him of the income that he could get right here and right now, which for low-income people is significant, but you deprive him of what's even more valuable, the experience to allow him to get a higher income after he moves on from this entry-level job. It also, it's an open invitation to crime. That is, you have kids who are bored to tears by the school. They have no legal way of earning a living if they drop out of school, and they can either hang around on the street corners and get into trouble, or they can actually actively take up a life of crime, which is very lucrative as long as it lasts, especially with things like drugs.
Yeah, and it's unfortunately lucrative, and it's really becoming prevalent, especially in the suburban areas, because there's really not as much to do. There's less jobs, there's less opportunity, and the only thing there for them to make money, and in some cases they take, their parents are having trouble, they feel to take it upon themselves to get a job, but they can't go to McDonald's, they can't go here, they can't go there because of all these laws, all these problems that they have to fight through, and all these hour restrictions that they're able to work, depending on what state you are. So it's really detrimental, and this is something that people really need to take a look at. Staying on the issue of France and their poor work habits and poor labor laws, collective bargaining. This is something that's obviously very hotly debated right now, as we're seeing in Wisconsin and Ohio and a bunch of other states. The issue of collective bargaining, though, it was two very progressive-minded Democrat presidents, Jimmy Carter and FDR, were fervently against federal union workers having collective bargaining rights. I don't like to call them rights, but that's the popular term.
Yeah.
Jimmy Carter actually took away the collective bargaining rights that was granted from President JFK in an executive order. Please outline the origin of collective bargaining rights in America for union workers, and what are its pitfalls?
Well, the unionization was always legal in and of itself, but it wasn't until 1935 that employers were compelled by law to negotiate with the unions that were certified by the government. In the public sector, in most cases, it was very much later before it became common to have labor unions. In fact, Calvin Coolidge first came to public attention as a governor who broke a strike and said, there is no right to strike against the public. But in later times, people said, why not have the public unions have collective bargaining rights just like the private ones? Well, it's a different system entirely. It's civil service. People have lifetime guaranteed jobs after a certain point, and so the whole situation is very different.
Mm-hmm. And that's part, pages 251 in the book for those that will be listening to the show and, checking out the book. By the way, I'm with Dr. Thomas Sowell. Great honor and privilege to have you on. We're talking about the book Basic Economics, the 4th edition. Available on Amazon. It's available in any major bookstore and even the minor bookstores. I encourage people to go out and get it, outline it, get a whole box of highlighters because you're going to need it. You're going to need Post-its, everything. There's just so much in here that dispels all the lies that we were told by the government and the media for so many years. Next thing that I want to talk about, I'm very passionate about this issue, is property rights, and pages 422 to 425 are the ones I really want to focus on, because property rights go so far past physical land. It's not just, I have this grassy field in the backyard. I want to either put a swing set back there, or I want to put something else. I want to plant there. It's not even about that. It's about your private property, your money, and that's liberating. Money is a liberation, and that's something that's being taken away through redistribution. I want to get your thoughts on how politicians and those in power are starting to strip away our property rights. And I also want to talk about eminent domain, because I think this is a direct threat to our liberty that the media just doesn't seem to cover and nobody's really focusing on.
Well, unfortunately, the courts over the years have eroded the protection of property rights in the Constitution. Too many people think of property rights as rights that affluent and rich people are interested in. Actually, some of the most devastating consequences of undermining property rights have fallen upon poor people who own no significant property themselves, but who are devastated by that. For example, in the housing area, this is painfully true in California, the government intervenes to stop you from using your property as you see fit. For example, if you're a farmer in California and you decide this is not going to make it, I'm going to give up farming, fine. You say, I'll just sell my land, to someone, and someone may want to build apartments or whatever. Well, there are laws and policies that will prevent you from doing that, and therefore your land is no longer worth what it would be in the open market, because people aren't allowed to use it to build on, and so it'll end up probably as open space somewhere. And the other thing that happens as a result of this is that housing prices skyrocket under these kind of conditions, and the poor are the biggest victims of that.
Yeah. And there's always a direct correlation to some way. There's always a consequence to something that you do. There's a chain reaction no matter what happens. There's just everything, and that's something that it seems that the progressive-minded politicians don't seem to understand, because they have this concept of forward thinking, and this is the problem what happened in China and the so-called Great Liberation, because when Mao Zedong was brought with the stories of people starving and dying in the streets and famine and all this kind of stuff, he said, let's keep going, because he doesn't seem to understand what it does to the people. And anyone that looks at real estate, you don't even have to live in California to see it. Go on Realtor.com, and you'll see the enormous prices. You go to New York, go to Brooklyn, you see the houses at 2-3 bedrooms. It's very small, and they're priced at almost $1 million. Who has $1 million to just throw away on a piece of property?
Yeah, there have been studies showing, for example, that the same house that sells for $150,000 in Houston, where they're not even zoning laws, would sell for over $1 million in San Francisco.